about that, but I'm also very privileged to be joined by two proud Malawians, Postar and Ronald, who will also share about some of the experiments that we've done in preparation to the summit, as well as will share what about the sustainability. This technology is already available, and I'm sure not many of you know, but 6 districts in Malawi are using drone deliveries on a daily basis. And Malawi is one of the very few African countries that deploy this technology very widely. And I think we really need to build on this and really expand the impact. But just going back to my supervisor's advice, with the increasing frequency of large-scale natural disasters, there is obviously an increased risk for vulnerable populations. And we often need to think about what are the bottlenecks that prevent us from, sometimes efficient response. And information management in general is and has been a challenge. And as other presenters have mentioned, as Commissioner, as United Nations representative was also alluding to, information management is a key for a efficient response. And this is where actually new technologies come into place. And Malawi is not alone, right? If we look on the global scale, a lot of countries have been using drones for emergency response and responses to earthquakes, floods, and tsunamis and any other disasters. And drones are also being used for other purposes. But a question to you, what do you think is in these key gadgets and items and the drone? Does the audience have an answer? If you can answer correctly, I can let you fly drone in the lunch break. Okay. Mobility, that's good goal. Another? Good. Space. Communication. Good. If you were really hitting the nail, but think even beyond this. It's the function. And drone can actually combine all of these 3 functions. Why? Drone can provide imagery. It's just the eyes in the air, but really provides a different perspective. And it has been used even in Malawian context, and I'm building here based on the Malawian context. Flood response, as well as mosquito breeding site assessments, where we can analyze the stagnant water bodies. It can also be used as a, let's say, router in the sky, where we can relay the data in the places where the connectivity is very limited. As well as drones can be used for the transport purposes, similar to the motorcycle, right? But it can actually help us reach the hard-to-reach areas and deliver various health commodities, emergency supplies, and other things that you need to put on the drone. However, today's kind of focus is really drone as a geospatial technology. And I really want to visualize, this slide is really not to show which technology is superior, because they are very complementary. But this is just to show where drones have an advantage, right? Because drones have also plenty of disadvantages, right? We cannot cover entire Malawi. I liked what Commissioner said about the drones at Dodma, right? When you have a flood of a magnitude as a result of the cyclone Ana, you simply cannot just take a small drone and fly over hundreds of square kilometers. But what you can do, actually, drone comes second. You can initially use the satellite imagery to analyze the extent. Although the water recedes very quickly, then based on those hotspots and base maps, you can send drones to the areas that have been the mostly affected. And what drone does is actually it can help provide the features, right? Even in this high resolution picture, if you compare satellite imagery, right, it's a bit blurry. You cannot tell, which building is collapsed, which is not. But then on the drone imagery, you can clearly see that, there are a couple of buildings of a school that have been washed away because of the heavy rains. However, drone imagery in itself is not really sufficient alone, because you cannot tell the level of service, right? You need to go on the ground and you send, ground data collectors to really understand what is the level of service, right? Where are the water access points? how actually community use school grounds for this. And this is where we start see the complementarity of all these different geospatial technologies, satellite, drone, and ground-based technologies, and with their advantages and disadvantages. I hope that the slides will be made available to the participants so that I can actually fast track some of those. But really, satellite can really cover large areas, although with a smaller resolution. Very useful at the early onset of the emergency. Drones definitely are a lower cost solution, very localized. You can send it to inspect health facilities, schools, wash infrastructure, and we'll show you actually how you can use it in a very, very time efficient manner. Ronald will speak about this. Now, when it comes to Cyclone Idai, what happened if hopefully, probably a lot of you remember this, heavy floods happened. The president of Malawi declared emergency state. 3 days after, the interagency assessment has been convened to assess the initial needs. And back then, drones were a part of the interagency assessment. We were kind of an embedded team, and Lyford from Dodma, as well as Wonderful from Red Cross. I cannot see Wonderful, but we were three of us. We were kind of a drone team responded. And that was, besides that, hopefully we contributed to assessment of some of the areas, some of the most affected areas in Nsanje district. This was an extremely useful learning experience because we really had to do, from ground zero. We first of all had to create a strategy where we need to focus, right? The information is very fluid in these types of situations. District commissioner tasked him to actually provide us with information. What are the locations where we need to go? We also had to understand how we capture the aerial imagery, how we process it with the very limited connectivity that we had. Also, how we analyze, because capturing and processing drone imagery, as Ronald will show you, it's very easy actually these days. But what do we really make out of this? And finally, how do we disseminate, right? How do we ensure that the insights derived from the drone imagery can be really transferred? Some really basic operational facts of the flights that we've conducted, and I'll go a bit in the map. This is what we selected as the most affected areas. This is how the capturing of the drone imagery looked like, and you can clearly see some of the households are submerged. Very interestingly, we found the fact that if you imagine the Nsanje district and the east of M1 road, a lot of buildings that were on the M1, east of M1 road, they were actually built with a very poor quality materials, which means that those houses that are built in flood-prone areas are the most vulnerable, but are the first ones to be washed away. And this is just, simple thing that we notice on the first day, right? Something needs to be done in terms of how do we advise communities where to build the structures. Then, of course, all those imageries, separate images, then they get stitched together into an orthomosaic, which gives us a much better understanding. Can anyone guess where is this? It's the middle of Bangula. Yeah. So we had a couple of different maps, and this is really this video, and I'll fast track. This really shows how we get actually on site. So let's say we fly the drone for 20 minutes, we collect imagery, then drone flies back. I process it maybe in 10 minutes, and after 30 minutes, we have this overview. 30 minutes. We have an overview of, see the east of M1 road. We can clearly see how many buildings are submerged. We can clearly see where the water is. And this is happening literally on site, no internet connectivity needed. Then I'll skip this because this just shows how the images are getting stitched, but nothing fancy. There is dedicated software to do this. And then finally, we partnered with a company from Sweden who had been to the drone corridor to really, get a sense, vectorize the flood extent. and also estimate a number of households that could have been affected, right? This is one of the, I guess, one of the first point of data that is needed in early needs assessment to understand, how much of the response support, how much of the shelter needs, how much of the educational needs are needed in the most affected areas. So we really derive that, 25 buildings out of this 112 in this map have been affected by floods. And then, of course, our GIS colleague UNICEF office have started creating an overarching kind of GIS overview of the response, also collaborating with Red Cross, with WFP, with others. And this is where we also posted the drone imagery. One thing that I wanted to note is this comparative analysis that you can do is basically to see, how far the waters have come from the Shiri River, and how much of the Marca, which is actually at the very, very bottom of Nasanje district. Don't tell anyone, but I stepped a little bit in Mozambique. The National Guard didn't see it. So yeah, how far the water has come, and you can clearly see the thing that I mentioned at the beginning. Those submerged houses, they were really with the thatched roof, very poor quality materials, and of course the most vulnerable. And of course we made sure that the insights from the drone report get kind of adopted by the flood response plan and appeal. And of course, we also asked Lyford what he thought, how useful is the drone imagery, and we were very happy to have him there. It was also kind of, mutual capacity building. It was also my kind of first emergency response with drones, but I think these are the learnings that we really try to take forward in building the capacity so that, we do not repeat some of the challenges that have happened in the Cyclone Aina and Gombe, where we didn't have a large scale deployment of drones. But I'll touch on this in the end. And I would like to now pass on to Ronald to share a little experiment that we did in preparation to the summit.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Mine is a short presentation about the sample that we did in Lilongwe in order to showcase what could happen in the most ideal situation when we were to deploy these drones into an area that is affected. So one of the scenarios that we set as a basis, we had to ensure that everything is at its best. So our scenario looked into the aspect that we are at district level and we had communication from, I know in the districts we have the village civil protection committees, the district civil protection committees, and those are the guys who have informed us at the district council that there is a flood in a particular area and we are supposed to go and do an initial assessment before the long-term assessment. So we chose Malingunde, since it has one of the largest water bodies in Lilongwe, as our sample area. And it took us almost 1 hour, 15 minutes to reach that place. And in our planning, we planned that Malingunde should be modeled as fully flooded and is not reachable. So we parked 5 kilometers away from Malingunde, the area that we were supposed to be planning to be collecting the data. And from there, so that it collects the impact. As you can see, we had support from students from the area. So once we took the images, there were a total of 645 images, 6 GB, covering a total of 1.8 square kilometers. This only took us about 35 minutes to collect the whole images, 658 images, and In order to process it, it took us about 10 minutes using Pix4D. Pix4D is one of the applications that are used to merge all of the images that are collected by the drones. Once it is merged, it brings you one whole image which is already georeferenced. It comes in as a GeoTIFF. And we used QGIS. It is an open source software. Everybody can use it. You can just download it, and it has built-in tools, and there are also free add-ins that you can add to QGIS. So after merging the 645 images, we came up with one image, as you can see. And that image took us 10 minutes to come up with. And for reference purposes, we also pulled out some images from Google satellites. We just positioned ourselves and linked our location to the Google satellites and we had that image. So one of the first things that we did was to compare and contrast what were the differences between the Google image that we had and the drone image that we had. I know that there are different sources of images we can get from the satellites, Landsat, but with our study, with our experiment, it was an initial assessment. We are planning for an initial assessment. So once we pull data like from Landsat, it needs a lot of processing. We need to process the clouds, everything, but we simply just put a Google image of the same location and laid it over with the drone imagery that we had. So as you can see, it was a market day during the day, and this is the Google image that we had overlaid over the drone imagery. As you can see, there's a big difference in terms of population movement and activities in the area. And the clarity of the picture as well is very good. This scenario can best be used when we are, as I said earlier, we are 5 Ks away from the exact location that we were taking drone imagery from. And it's the best scenario when you don't have access to an area, but you want to have an initial idea about what is happening to that area. The roads are blocked, it's fully flooded. You can just fly in the drone and it will come up with the pictures, and you can do a comparison. You can contrast, compare and contrast with what is online and what you have collected. And you can come up, you can see the activities. An example is maybe an area is flooded and people have camped somewhere. This is a perfect scenario. You can try to understand that this particular area has been, is being settled by people who are internally displaced by the floods. That was that. And another thing that we did was to utilize the water body. There is the river and the dam that is being built at the moment. So what we did was to vectorize the whole river in our area that we mapped. In QGIS, it's just a simple thing. You just draw, sketch around the river. And that's the blue part that we have over there. And it took almost like 10 minutes because you just follow the lines of the river that you're seeing. And then the next thing that we did was to vectorize the urban settlements, the structures within the area that we took the drone imagery. Over here, there are 2 options. We have the OpenStreetMaps. Most of the times, the OpenStreetMaps do have settlements. And in QGIS, you can pull the settlements as a separate layer. You can use it for this kind of assessments. But in rural areas, it's most of the times areas are blank, so you have to select the households one by one. But fortunately enough, in QGIS, we have a tool called the Magic Wand, which categorizes structures as you select them. So it looks at the pixels of the roofing. So when you select one roof, it will analyze the whole image and it will pull up all the images with the similar type of pixels with that roof that you have. Of course, with a little bit of cleaning, this was done within 45 minutes, and we managed to vectorize about 1,800 settlements within 1,800 structures within the area that we mapped using our drone. So let's come back to the river. We've vectorized the river, and now we have a buffer of that river. The reason behind the buffer is during the previous presentations, as you saw, there is the river and there is the flooded area. So you can draw as well, the same way that we did with the river, you can draw around the river, the area where it has been flooded. And with that, many households are within that flooded area. Another way is to create a buffer where maybe we also want to provide some emergency communication, or maybe we want to inform the VCPCs about which households should take care, should be cautioned that there's an impending flood coming to the area. So that buffer also determines the households, the structures that can be affected by the flooding. And the buffer drawing is the same as the river. They are the same tools that we use in QGIS, open software, and it doesn't take a lot of time to come up with the buffer. So we have the buffer, we have the river, and we have the households, the structures. The structures are those little small dots. Those are the structures that were picked by the tool that we used in QGIS. What we want to do now is to find out how many households are within that buffer, how many households are within that flood extent. So the same tool we also have some tools in QGIS where you can just intersect the two layers, the layer for the structures and the layer for the buffer, and you come up with structures within that buffer, and that will determine the households that may or may not be affected by the flooding or the flood extent. From our experience, within that buffer, we had 588 households, and some stats from NSO, it was about 2,800 people that were affected or were at risk of being affected by the floods, whether their houses were fully flooded or they were displaced by the floods. You should also note that during this initial experiment, we didn't use the digital elevation models or the terrain models because it's just an initial assessment. And all of these things, we merged them, we did the simple analysis, and we came up with that number of households and people that are likely to be affected by the buffer zone of the flood extent. And it took us a total of 194 minutes, which is fairly about maybe 3 hours from traveling 1 hour to reach our site. I set up the drone. It takes the pictures, we process everything, we do the simple GIS analysis. Within 3 hours, we had an initial number of people that may be affected by the floods. So this is one of the ways that we can be using our drones within the districts at national level, just in order to get the initial assessments of the people that are affected, whether it is floods, earthquakes. You can buffer you can buffer everything. So this is just an example. There are advanced processes that you can be using for analysis, but it takes time. So it depends on the need at that particular moment. If you know that you have more time, then you can do some advanced and let's say maybe more accurate analysis. But for an initial assessment, I think this is the most applicable way that we can be using the drones. Yes, that was all that we tested and experimented in Malengunde. Yeah, thanks.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. My role here today is to talk a bit about the potential sustainability of all of this, right? I think with the growing demand for the need and the use cases that have been described here, that also requires making sure that we have the right people equipped to be able to take on this work. So back in 2020, an academy called the African Drone and Data Academy was started. Initially, it was located here in Lilongwe, and then it moved on to Malawi University of Science and Technology in the middle of last year. Now, the underlying premise for that is, how do we equip young people with the type of skills that will allow them to be able to use this technology to address the real challenges that we're facing in the country and beyond and across the continent. So the issue we're trying to address, or we are trying to address continuously, is to build global level skills amongst African youth to use drone and data technology as a conduit for improving the lives of especially children and women. And through the academy, we believe that our students are, in fact, not just believe, they have gone on to attain opportunities as well as create opportunities for these use cases in humanitarian purposes. So by building on this local and regional capacity and to support a growing ecosystem, we lay foundation for layers of sustainability, right? Not just for ADDA itself, but for the ecosystem that is growing and for the growing needs of the use of this technology. So we work, one of the key strengths for ADDA is that we work in partnership with various partners. So for example, the curriculum itself was developed by a university called Virginia Tech in collaboration with Furman University, which are from the US. But from the get-go, the idea was we need to build local institutional capacity, hence the collaboration with the Malawi University of Science and Technology. And furthermore, in terms of working with the government, we have a very strong relationship with the Department of Civil Aviation, which is the regulator for being able to legally and efficiently use drones in Malawi. It's okay, slide's not moving. Okay, my slide doesn't seem to be moving. Cool. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I won't go into too much technical detail, but the delivery of the African Drone and Data Academy is a blended learning, right? So there are a couple of online options that you can do. Some are self-paced, some are through our facilitators, but those are intended to give you kind of the basics for being able to then go into what is our anchor offering, which is an intense 6-week program that happens on site and campus at the Malawi University of Science and Technology. And there they are taught everything from aerodynamics to putting together a drone, to being able to learn to do a design project on a use case for the drones, and also to learn how to interpret the data that can be collected using drones. And from there, they get 4 certifications. One of them is what we call a remote piloting license, which is issued by the Department of Civil Aviation, which means that our students and our graduates are well equipped to be able to get to using this their skills and technology at any time that's needed, because they have the required licensing to be able to do so. To date, we have graduated 673 students across 25 countries. And I personally am proud of the fact that we can, confidently tell you that 60% of those are young women. And that has been by design because we want to ensure that there's more participation and access for young women in STEM. And 70% of our graduates have gone on to either gain employment in the drone and data industry or be able to create employment for others as well, right? And beyond just graduating from the academy, we also look at how does the work that they go on to do, what other initiatives is that feeding or supporting. So, for example, we track where they go on to and what they do, and we, for example, know that SDGs 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, and 13 are something that are being covered by the work they do. Furthermore, it's also complementary with the growth and development strategy, where we're looking at education and skills, health and population, and then other development areas, including disaster risk management. And then there's the National Sector Investment Plan, where we're looking at transferable skills and digital skills. And then also with Vision 2063 and the Malawi Implementation Plan, for example, with agricultural productivity and commercialization, because they can also use this drone and data technology for agriculture example. So that's just an example of how the collaboration and the feeding into other initiatives is something that is always at the heart of the sustainability angle of ADDA. Going forward, part of the plans that we have in terms of ensuring that there is further sustainability and scalability for ADDA is one, to ensure that local ownership is something that takes into effect. So from 2023, from next year, the ownership and lead running of the academy will be handed over to the Malawi University of Science and Technology. And we believe that that is something that will continue to serve as a conduit for being able to ensure that more and more young Malawians in Malawi are accessing these 21st century skills. The second one could be a bit technical, but the remote piloting license is something that can only be issued by an organization that is allowed to do so by the DA. So one of the things that we're exploring is how can we partner with local enterprises to be able to possibly offer that as a standalone as well, because some people might be able to have the requisite knowledge and skills already, but might not be able to have the certification to be able to actually operate the drones in the required use cases. And then the third one is we are laying the groundwork for a TVET curriculum, right? So initially the focus has been on graduates in formal higher education institutions. And obviously we want to be able to provide access to this kind of skills to people who might not necessarily also follow that stream. So a vocational program, a curriculum is something that's also in the workings. And then the fourth level is in collaboration with MUST, as well as the two universities I mentioned, Virginia Tech and Furman University. We're looking at developing a master's curriculum in drone and data technology. And hopefully that is something that could be done in collaboration with a number of public higher education institutions. And then finally, we do have a healthy pool of operators right now in the country who hire some of our graduates here and outside as well. But I think we also know that one of the ways to ensure that we're able to create more opportunities and more impact and scale our impact is to try and encourage local startup and entrepreneurship. So there's an incubation center that is also being developed this year. And part of that we'll be looking at we can develop prototypes in manufacturing and also be able to learn from the current operators to provide on-job coaching, mentoring, and technical, so that our own youth are the ones who will be able to be running these operations and also hopefully contribute towards localizing the manufacturing of drones, for example. So just to draw a quick, and I won't dwell too much on this because I think Tautus and Ronald both spoke at length about this, but I think just to draw a straight line between ADDA and some of the ways in which we are also contributing towards disaster responses, for example, with the tropical storm Anna, what we're able to do in kind of a similar timeline that my colleagues had mentioned was to be able to mobilize former graduates, get them down from Blantyre, they went to Chikwawa, they did some mapping, came back and then did a whole author mosaic which showed the affected areas and the levels of flooding, etc. So I think this is just to demonstrate that it is not skills for the sake of skills, but it's skills for the sake of empowering them to be able to respond to issues like this. And then in terms of sustainability, I think what is always a related concept to us is, scaling, right? So one of the big things from the get-go has been, Malawi is going to be the birthplace of the African Drone and Data Academy, but the plan is to have as many of these academies across the continent as possible. So very happy and proud to say, like, we are on the brink and the threshold of opening another of these campuses in Niger very soon. In fact, we have a delegation coming from Niger to come and visit the country to learn, you know, how do you work with different partners? What does management of this looks like? How do you ensure that there's alignment between what the students are learning and getting out of there versus what they use that for when they leave, things like that. So Niger is something that is opening very, very soon. And then from there, there are also plans to look into opening campuses in either Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, and quite recently also some preliminary conversations with colleagues in South Africa. But I think being able to scale this across the different countries can only be beneficial for the continent as a whole. And then finally, sustainability requires that we don't necessarily work in isolation, right? So there are a lot of initiatives that are going on that are targeted at youth. So one of the things that we're looking at is to be able to ensure that we can complement some of these initiatives that are happening. So one such initiative is YOMA. I would encourage each of you, when you get the chance, to look that up. But it's essentially a digital matching platform that uses AI to be able to provide learning and job opportunities for youth, right? And related to the fact that, you know, we want to ensure that our graduates are using their skills to the fullest and tapping into different initiatives that will help them bring the most value and impact to children and women. I think it is something that we're exploring, and it's important that we can be able to collaborate these different types of initiatives. So yeah, I think with that, I'll hand back to Taurus.
Thank you so much, Foster and Ronald, again. To really wrap it up, what do we need to do better to improve the use of these technologies for the purposes of the local communities, to improve the responses? In the Cyclone Ida response, we noticed that there is a lot of discrepancies between different available vulnerability-based maps. And I really like what Mark and Fook were presenting. I think we are speaking the same language when it comes to these data sets, common operational data sets. These would, the consolidation of them and improvement of the quality of them would greatly improve the kind of overall information management and deployment of these new technologies. Of course, the scaling the use of satellite imagery at the early onset of the emergencies would also greatly help to strategize and focus the deployment of drones and other technologies. Also, it's very, very important to understand what are the different cross-sectoral needs in terms of information and data that could be derived from this aerial imagery, right? Maybe we can overlay the wash infrastructure, school data, health facility data to really look closer into how those facilities have been affected. So working closely with the clusters as well as interagency group will be very important. Training of relevant personnel, including African Drone and Data Academy, but also rather relevant personnel at the government institutions, as well as districts that are mostly flood prone, would extremely help in working towards that. Use of digital terrain models to improve the flood model accuracy. Alert procedures, early warnings, so that actually the response teams that use these new innovative technologies, they are very closely linked to those alert systems, early warning systems. And obviously, to put this all in practice, what we've been doing for the past couple of months is basically working on a concept with partners, and particularly the African Data Academy, where as a result of all those graduates that graduate from the African Data Academy, the graduates that have the same skill set, usually one person has the skill set of drone piloting as well as the data GIS analysis, so that we would be able to create under probably the structure of African Drone and Data Academy with the reporting lines to the relevant government authorities, a Malawi Rapid Drone Response Unit that combines the use of air imagery as well as GIS capacity at this very, very early onset of emergencies. But also, it builds the scalability so that we do not only focus on very few areas, but we are available to deploy a number of teams, a number of people in the case of emergency to collect the data that benefits the interagency assessment needs. I'll stop there, and if you have any questions, we are all happy to address those. Thank you. Thank you.
For those who are online, use the chat section as well to post your questions.
Okay, hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Roger Salunge from the University of Twente, Faculty of Earth and Management Observation. Well, I have a legal background, so my questions are, I have two questions actually, which have to do with privacy and data protection. Now, there was a slide I saw, like images of children who had support for the drone the experiment. So we now, from a legal perspective, I begin to think we all know the story of the Chibok girls of Boko Haram in 2014, the unfortunate story of the kidnappings, and we also know that with data, with drone imagery and all that, and children are like specifically vulnerable. So when we have images which we can combine with other data sets, and we can actually know where children in clusters are located. Also, Malawi has an issue in the past of maybe child trafficking and all that. What measures are in place within UNICEF and maybe other partners to ensure that these connections are not made, or maybe they don't fall into the right hands? It's true, data protection law will even say don't ever group such data sets in one place to risk these data sets being connected to locate vulnerable people like children. So in as much as we want to provide solutions, what do we really put in place to ensure that these things don't happen? Maybe so anonymization, I mean, some other techniques within UNICEF, or and of course in line with the Malawi data protection laws, bills, or the UNICEF, the ICRC data protection principles of 2015. And second question is on the rights, the information, because I know, for example, the data protection bill requires that before taking images or personal information, you have to inform the people on their right to consent. First of all, if they don't have the right to consent, you have to tell them what the images you are taking about, you are taking of them, what you're going to do with it. So now, that, of course, the law is written in English, so I'm sure the people in the villages don't speak English, maybe they are not educated. So, but we are all equal before the law. We should have, if I have a right to privacy, or to have my information provided to me, I'm in Lilongwe, I can speak English. I have the person who is that also this language. It's up to you, UNICEF and others, to provide to these people in a format, a language they can understand. So what are there any measures taken towards that direction to ensure compliance in this case?
Yeah, thank you so much, Rogers. The fact that you are in Malawi, it's the step for us to get closer. The project that we are collaborating on with you and Brian is the step closer. This is really a pertinent issue, and we are. I actually told this to Ronald and Poster in preparation to the presentation. Always expect two types of questions: sustainability and privacy of data. And obviously, what we did with the children is basically because Ronald speaks Chichewa, he approached them. We asked them to be, at the safe distance, and then we also showed them the pictures of themselves. Of course, there were no adults in vicinity, but we take the kind of data protection very seriously in that regard. And we, especially when it comes to the creation of maps. We fly at a certain altitude that is usually 100 or 120 meters, where you cannot really identify anything from the top, especially the faces of the people. And if we, like larger larger assemblies of people, we take that into consideration. But it's not really realistic that any of the faces in the ortho mosaic would be recognized. Now, if we talk about the households that could be recognized, I think we also need to take into consideration about the addresses. Can those be identified? But I think that's a kind of entire process that we are working to identify and to mitigate for those. So that's to your first question. And also, I often, when I get asked this question, I often pose a question back. The drone is nothing different from a camera, right? We could be going around the room taking the pictures without other people consenting to this. And I think the drone, when the people are looking at it, in these type of situations, when we openly communicate that the drone is taking a picture, right? It's already a form of consent in these types of situations, right? So I think we need to be very pragmatic and realistic on what can be achieved. And that's why community sensitization, that actually UNICEF has been engaged since 2017 in communities where the drones are being used. We make very sure that the traditional leaders, village leadership really clearly knows actually what are the benefits of drones and what are the risks of drones, because they often come to us and ask, oh, what if drone crashes? What should we do with it? Imagine drone carrying an infectious medical samples. So we really work together very closely with district authorities and Ministry of Information that plays a very important role in here in sensitizing communities understanding. And actually we take them onto roadshows where drones are shown to people, what drones are capable of, flying medicines as well as taking pictures. I hope that helps answer.
Thank you so much. My name is Andrew Jamali from National Planning Commission. I want to thank you for the presentation, quite elaborate and very insightful. My question is that with all the initiatives that are taking place to really support generating of on-spot data that gives us a very true picture of what's happening for us to respond. As a planner, I'm looking at the interface that should be there with all the stakeholder community in that respect. The very fact we have like an academy in Malawi that's piloting these kind of initiatives, we should be thinking in the background about how do we scale up these things and how do we make sure that it is accessible to the people that have been targeted for. That's the first part. It's not a question, it's just something maybe you might have covered, but maybe to some not great detail in that respect. Next thing I want to talk about is the issue of the interface with the private sector, which is very key in terms of upscaling of these kind of innovations and technologies. How do I come in on that? You see, the university students could be producing these things in the laboratories, in the workshops and stuff like that. But for us to really benefit and create a work-driven kind of innovation in that direction, we need the interface with private sector. So the question is, as you're moving in this direction, what has been the kind of interface that's been there with the private sector in Malawi? They are the ones who've got the money. Even if government really adopts one of these technologies and it wants to upscale it in the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Health, we'll be looking at the private sector to spin up the production for these kind of technologies. So we think about what kind of interface is already existing in that respect. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for the first comment. I think that's an apt capturing of the sentiment there. Let me try and address the second question, right? Just to kind of put this in context. So ADDA is not just, for example, students in a university setting, right? We also have professionals, we have people who are aspiring to start their own things. But I think the key thing was that we were basically in a kind of first cycle, if you will, right? So let's test this proof of concept. Let's see how effective this can be. Let's see how this can work. And I think in the process, we were able to benefit greatly from a pool of funds from different donors from across the globe who helped set this up and operationalize it, right? Now, the task that we have as we're reaching kind of the first 3 years of it is, I think if I go back to those tiers of sustainability, to address your specific question, is that fifth one of incubation, right? I think one of the, there are colleagues in this room who, are in different capacities working in an innovation ecosystem, right? And there have been various initiatives by different organizations to ensure that there's collaboration between development partners, government, as well as private sector to be able to support this entrepreneurship that we want from young people. So as we are transitioning to that, I think there will be a lot more engagement with the private sector because there have been successes that you can point to. For example, you've got the M-Hubs and this, Digital Malawi programs, etc., that have successfully kind of worked with young people to help operationalize both digital skills, right? And as we're going towards this incubation process, we have a lot more engagement with sector. So that's something that is definitely great that you pointed out, and it's something that's also key on our agenda. Thanks. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. My name is Johanna from Save the Children, and I would like to ask you, can you give some more examples how this drone technology could support anticipatory action and scaling up preparedness and prevention?
Thank you. Excellent question. We didn't touch on this because we had limited time allocated, so we really wanted to focus on response. But just a quick example on how this could be used in anticipatory action. So the digital terrain models, they're usually the accessible ones. They are very derived from satellite imagery, the 3D models of our land. And they are usually quite low resolution in the sense that if you have a, let's say, narrow river, and if the resolution of satellite is, let's say, I don't know, 10 meters per pixel, then it really, you could miss a lot of important details, like a small bridge or intersection or something like this. So drones come into place where they can actually provide you with an imagery with which you can model a very high resolution digital terrain model that really replicates our world in 3D, and you can have that accurate 3D model for flood modeling. And obviously flood forecasting. We are working with Department of Climate Change and Meteorological Services, Yobu is here, and DWR and DODMA, particularly in a similar activity in the northern part of Malawi, where we want to use blended approach, satellite imagery and drone imagery to model the floods, pluvial and fluvial, to ensure that we precisely know how the water would flow from the rivers and what are the discharge levels there. So that's just one example. Another example is this mosquito breeding sites. Actually, it's another area where drones could be used to monitor the stagnant water bodies, to assess the mosquito breeding site and inform necessary irrigation processes to drain those stagnant water bodies. There are a couple of different entities in Malawi that have been piloting the use of this. Yeah, but there is multiple different use cases that could be used for preparedness as well.
We need to close this part so that we can move on to the last segment. Perhaps what we'll do is we can just get one the last question, and then the rest of the questions will be captured. I think responses can be shared later. I saw a hand there. Maybe let's just get that question and then we move to the next session.
Good afternoon. My name is Lilongwe. I work for the National Statistics as a statistician. My question goes to one of the presenters. He talked of caption of drone images and processing. And one of the software that was mentioned was Pix4D. However, looking at the software, it's not free. I think it's a paid one. However, looking at the situation now that images are used and processing is more now, people are much interested, and especially the students. Are there any other alternatives to Pix4D that maybe other people that are interested to do image processing can use? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. And a very quick answer, yes, there are open source technologies that can be used free of charge. It's called Open Drone Map. It's built by an open source community. And it has different modalities. It can be used for cloud processing, for which you might need to pay some money, but there is also an offline version which you can use on your machine. Only the processing might take more time. We use this just to show that in case of emergencies, we use specifically emergency response dedicated software, but Open Drone Map can do the same job, maybe just a little more time, but it's completely free of charge.
Okay, thanks a lot. Perhaps we can give a applause to Tatas, Poster, and Leonard. Thank you.